So this is a video response to Stefan Molyneux and his video Why I Was Right About Atheism, which in turn was a response to his own video Why I Was Wrong About Atheism. And I know we're only about 10 fucking seconds in and this is already hideously confusing, but he'd made this video Why I Was Wrong About Atheism and I wanted to respond to that video, but bugger me, before I had a chance to do so, he responded to his own video and also to the comments, some comments that have been left on his own video. And so it seems sensible from my position to respond to his follow-up video and not the original. I'll tell you what, I'll just play you a bit of Stefan and we'll take it from there.
Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. Hope you're doing well.
Well, first off, thanks for sending me my t-shirt back, but yeah, thanks, I'm doing very well, thank you very much. In fact, my little future taxpayer is at nursery today, which has afforded me the chance to record this video today, but yeah, I'm doing very, very well, so thank you for that.
So put out a video just a couple of days ago pointing out that atheists tend to, lean a little to the left, seem to be a little bit on the left of the political spectrum, and got a wide variety of responses back with a chilling uniformity of thought, I guess you could somewhat say.
And I very much intended to have been part of that response, Stefan, and I apologise that I wasn't, but I'm here at last. Okay, maybe a little bit late for the party, always the bridesmaid, never the fucking bride. It's the story of my life, writ large. But I'm here now, Stefan, so let's outline what your problems were with the responses that you got.
And the arguments seemed to fall along sort of the following categories. So I say there's a tendency for atheists to be on the left, and it seems like everyone and their dog decided to type into the keyboard, well, I'm an atheist and I'm not on the left. It's like, yes, that is what is called a tendency. It doesn't mean 100%. So that's emotionally reactive garbage, fundamentally. I mean, you have to be better than that. If you want to be an atheist, you have to put forward some relatively decent critical thinking.
First off, you don't have to be a critical thinker to be an atheist. I don't know what you're on about there. I don't know where this comes from, this idea that you've got to be a critical thinker, or in some ways you've got to be an intellectual if you regard yourself as an atheist. You don't have to be any one of those things. There are hundreds of millions of Buddhists in the world, and many of those Buddhists are of atheistic strains of Buddhism. And we're claiming that they're all critical thinkers. What about the person who's just born into a non-religious family that never really gives it a lot of thought, but nevertheless doesn't believe in God? They're just as much an atheist as anybody else, but no fucking critical thinking whatsoever has taken place there. But I agree with you, Stefan, with regard to the comments you make. I can't speak on behalf of my dog, although I haven't really got a dog, but I certainly didn't leave any comments like that, and I wouldn't leave any comments like that. And what I hope to do is to make a substantially more robust argument against what you have to say than those commenters had made.
And the facts are fairly compelling. The Freedom from Religious Foundation ran a survey from June through December of 2015. While 70% declined to affiliate themselves with one of the major political parties, that's two, in the US, more than 20% identified themselves as independent voters. 36% described themselves as progressive or liberal. And, sorry, 1% said that they were Republicans. There were lots of socialists and Marxists. There were progressives and liberals, Democrats, a few libertarians, and 1% of this group's survey were Republicans. That's 8,000 people. So let's compare this, right? So I said, well, people who are atheists tend to skew left and people who are religious tend to skew right. So 1% of this group of atheists said they were Republicans. In 2011, 70% of white evangelical Protestants identified as Republicans or leaning towards the Republican Party, and 28% expressed support for the Democratic Party.
Okay, so you provided some statistics, Stefan. Not just the statistics, but a link to the statistics, and I respect that, Stefan. So listen, I don't want to underwhelm you with just giving you another example of my own personal position or anything like that. I am going to provide you with statistics. Now listen, I was born in the United Kingdom. I live in the United Kingdom. I've always lived in the United Kingdom. And I also know that in terms of sort of socio-political outlook, religiosity, how those fit together and how economics fit together with those, that the UK is pretty typical of a country of its type, right? So I'm going to give you data from the United Kingdom. Now, I took the liberty, and I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of looking you up on Wikipedia, and it turns out that you will already know this, of course, that you were born in Ireland, right, and that you now live in Canada. So obviously you picked data from the United States of America. So look, I'm going to be as generous as I can be here, and I'm going to assume that you picked data from the United States of America because most of your subscribers are from there and most of your views are going to come from there, so you see that as relevant to those people. But you're not a thick person, Stefan, right? So I know that you know that in terms of these things, the United States of America is atypical. It is not a good example to pick. It is much, much more religious than other countries of its type. So if you look at the United States, all you know about is the United States, and it doesn't really tell you anything about anywhere else. In fact, look at some data here, which is an interesting chart that plots GDP per capita against how important people regard religion in their lives. There's two big outliers on there. Everybody's following a curve, Stefan, apart from China to one side and the United States way over to the other side, way, way more religious than all other countries of its type in terms of economics, and economics, of course, chimes in with the left-right political spectrum, does it not? So it's very relevant here. Okay, now, if any Americans are feeling a little bit out in the cold there, I must point out that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia aren't plotted on this graph, and if they were plotted, then maybe you'd have a couple of little bedfellows there. But how comfy that's going to make Stefan feel to think that Saudi Arabia would plot it next to the country that he chose as his example, I don't know. So what I'm saying is the United States is really not a very good example to pick. I think the United Kingdom is a much better example to pick, so how about I give you the data for the United Kingdom? Now, before I give you this data, something that you must be aware of, get your head around this. This is interesting in its own right. The last UK census, 70% of people identified as Christians. And what the census is interested in is culturally, how do you identify? 70% identify as Christians. The British Social Attitude Survey, which is the next biggest survey we have in the United Kingdom after the census, wants to know actually about what you believe in, not what you culturally associate with. 50% of the UK population do not believe in a god or gods. So what that means is, right, that 20% of the UK population describe themselves as Christians but don't believe in God. Wrap your fucking head around that, little bastard, right? But while you're doing so, that's important when you have a look at these statistics. So let's have a look at these statistics now. So here's the data. I think it makes interesting reading. It was carried out by YouGov, commissioned by the Times, or as Americans like to call it, the Times of London. And what I've done is, on this table, just to make it a little bit more interesting, the columns that we're interested in is the Conservatives, which are the right-wing party, the equivalent of the Republicans, if you like, and the Labour Party, which are the equivalent of the Democrats. They are the two big political animals in UK politics, the two big parties there. What I've done is I've took the liberty of swapping those columns around, because in the original survey, the right-wing party's column was on the left, and the left-wing party's column was on the right, which made it a little bit confusing. So I've just swapped those columns around. I haven't altered any of the other data. So this is what we get from this. The question was asked, what is your religion? And of those that had voted for the left-wing party, 42% of them said that they didn't have a religion. Of those that had voted for the right-wing party, 32% said they didn't have a religion. So there's still that same trend going on that we see in the United States, but it is much, much, much smaller in scope. In terms of identifying as Christian, 48% of those who voted for the left-wing party identified as Christian, 61% who voted for the right-wing party identified as Christian. So the same thing going on again. But bear in mind what I said earlier. We have this body of people in the United Kingdom that identify as Christians, that identify as religious, but don't actually believe in God. right? And when we're talking about atheism, what is important is not whether you identify as a cultural Christian, it's whether or not you believe in God. Fortunately, YouGov asked another question, which is, people have different beliefs about God. Which of the following best applies to you? I believe there is a God. Of the left-wing party, 35% of those that voted for the left-wing party believe there is a God. 34% of those, even less, who voted for the right-wing party believe there is a God. Okay, so there's only 1% in that. I don't believe that's probably statistically significant within the sample size of this. But what that's telling us is that effectively there is no difference whatsoever. Then when it comes in terms of belief in God and actually whether or not you're an atheist or a theist, there is no difference whatsoever between the party that's on the political left and the party that's on the political right. No difference whatsoever. That is entirely different to the situation that's portrayed in the United States, a country which I am suggesting to you is the atypical one, not the United Kingdom. So why should the situation be so much different in the United States? Well, let's see if we can pick this apart. How Stefan portrays this. He seems to portray, certainly in the instance of this video, of right-wing and left-wing politics as mainly boiling down to small government, big government, and forget about all the other issues. Forget about stances on issues like abortion, right, and personal rights. Forget about issues relating to things like science issues of science denialism, uptake of creationism rather than the modern evolutionary synthesis, climate change, and actually listening to what the fucking scientists have to say rather than thinking that you naysay the scientists and know more than they do about their specific fields of science. Forget about all those different things. It's just about small government versus large government. But he portrays it as if that atheists, and he seems to just take the United States example as if that is an exemplar of atheists in the general form, that they gravitate towards left-wing politics and they're gravitating towards large government. But the vast majority of the people in the United States are Christians. Atheists aren't setting the agenda. They're a very small pawn in all of this. I suggest to you that in the United States it's the Christians that are setting the agenda. They're the one that have set up their wagons on the right and have made it a really inhospitable place for anybody else. I just looked on the news yesterday and this guy John Kasich, he'd withdrawn his candidacy right for the Republican nomination. Now, I don't know all the different candidates, but what I know is that he wasn't the wacko Christian candidate, that he was regarded as like the moderate candidate that could have had cross-party appeal. He was the moderate candidate, and yet when he ended his candidacy, this is what he said: "As I suspend my campaign today, I have renewed faith, deeper faith, that the Lord will show me the way forward." Can you not see how unappealing that is to an atheist, to think that this guy who is a moderate in your party thinks that he has a little supernatural agent whispering in his ear telling him what to do? If he was a politician in the United Kingdom, not only would that freak out the atheists, but it would freak out 90% of the Christians. In the United States, the only people who will buy that kind of shit are the Christians there, and even some Christians won't buy it. That is a major turn-off for an atheist, to think that your politician who you might be voting for thinks that he's hearing little voices in his head telling him what decisions he makes, when you don't believe that that little voice even exists. So what I'm suggesting here is that the United States is the odd man out, and that actually it's the Christians that have co-opted the right and have made that the religious side, and have brought on board a lot of issues onto the right that don't necessarily sit there, or certainly don't sit there to the degree that they normally would, and that has made it an inhospitable place for atheists and people and agnostics, and that's why they've gravitated towards the left. It's a very unnatural state of affairs. It's not the natural state of affairs that Stefan makes it out to be, and it's absolutely fuck all to do with this small government, big government thing as he makes out it to be. Okay, let's have a little bit more Stefan.
That's why I put forward a hypothesis that atheists tend to replace the God with the state. When they leave religion, they tend to promote the state into the place formerly occupied by religion.
Well, look, it's your hypothesis, but I just think it's flat out wrong. I mean, it is true that the state fulfills some of the functions that previously the churches did, and of course in centuries gone by that the monasteries fulfilled, but most of those functions were social functions for the betterment of society. They weren't intrinsic to the religion and to the act of worship and to the belief in God itself. And those roles were just took on from the church, and were taken on by the state. And the secularization of most of those roles, Stefan, and the secularization of Western Europe in most of those aspects happened centuries before Western Europe lost its religion. So this is the problem then, is that you're presenting this as a kind of either or, that Christians regard these as roles of the church and atheists regard them as roles of the state, but that's not the case. The case is that Christians were more than happy to see most of these absorbed into the roles of the state, and they were more than happy to have the state have those roles in their life. So if Christians can be happy with that without you regarding them as worshipping the state, how come when atheists adopt exactly the same position, you insist that what they're doing is, well, they're worshipping the state now rather than worshipping a religion? Can you see what a crooked way of looking at things that actually is?
I put forward a hypothesis. See, atheists tend to really be into science, love their science, right?
Well, this is just such bullshit, Stefan. You're just using this ridiculous stereotype of atheists because, well, you're using it for your own ends. You know as well as I do that this isn't true, that atheists are just normal people that go right across the spectrum the same as anybody else. Are you telling me that those Taoists and Buddhists there in China, they just can't get enough science, those bastards, can they? That in the UK, the 50% of the population that don't believe in a god or gods, that, yeah, you walk into their front room, Stefan, and they might be watching the latest tripe that Simon Cowell's made, or some deathly fucking dull soap opera, but as soon as you walk out the room, they're straight onto a documentary channel, watching something about evolutionary biology or quantum mechanics. What an absolute load of fucking hogwash that is. They are just normal people, the same as everybody else, and yes, the outspoken ones, the ones you see online, whether it's the fucking intellectual giants like the Richard Dawkins that are really well known, or whether it's just some stupid gobshite like me, right? They might fill that stereotype that you've made there, but they're no more representative of the average atheist than a fire and brimstone preacher is representative of the average Christian.
Religion was a supernatural structure by which social norms, morals, and ethics were transmitted intergenerationally, and it attempted to create judge, jury, and executioner within the mind, within the conscience of each individual, so that people would be good, however that was defined in the religion, they would be good without that goodness having to be enforced by a very expensive external agency like the police, law courts, and prisons, and so on.
Yeah, well, that's great in theory, but it never really works out that way, does it? And as much as people have tried to co-opt religion to fulfill those particular goals, and as much as society, states, governments, kings and queens, Stefan, have tried to co-opt religion to fulfill those goals, it never kind of works out that way. In Europe, I don't know, over 40,000 people in the 16th and 17th century were burnt as witches, Stefan, and that included quite an extensive period of identification and of testing and of interrogation and of torture and of trial, and then finally burning the witch, right? Quite an intensive process of enforcement went on there, right? And religion didn't do anything to stop that happening. In fact, that happened because of religious attitudes, didn't it? So it really doesn't work out in quite the way that you're portraying here.
Now, what is the state? Well, the state is a hierarchical structure designed to reward people with continued freedom or threaten them with punishments, not hell, but prison, if they do not conform to social norms. And it does not as much attempt to internalize, because it doesn't as much appeal to one's, you're going to be punished in the afterlife forever and so on. It doesn't quite as much attempt to internalize as religion does, always watching and so on. But the reality is that both the state and religion are methodologies by which society attempts to gain compliance to social norms from its members.
So you make some comparisons here between the two things that are true, but they're trivially true. I mean, yes, religion and the state or society is hierarchical, but give me an example around the world of where people have managed to organise millions of people that doesn't involve a hierarchical structure, so we've got some kind of comparison, because I don't know any. They all seem to have some kind of hierarchical structure. It's very, very difficult. Easy in a small tribe, it can be possible to have that, but once you get large numbers of people, you need some kind of hierarchical structure. And you talk about society imposing these social norms on its members. No, society is its members, and society is a tool that people use to impose their social norms on one another. That is what we do. I suggest to you that that is the business of morality itself. That is why we have this moral sense that we have. It's not about our own behaviour, it's about the behaviour we're expecting in others, and society is a tool by which we influence the behaviour of others, and that is exactly what we're doing. I don't want you to kill me, Stefan, right? I didn't like your video very much, and if you don't like the fact that I didn't like your video very much, I don't want you to be able to kill me. So if through society I can fashion some structures by which it's much harder for you to kill me, or by which there are penalties if you kill me, then it is in my interest to do that. And that is what society is largely about. It's very self-interested, even though on the face of it, it doesn't look as if it is. And this is something that I find somewhat objectionable about you. I know you, just the same as me, don't like the idea of Muslims using Western liberal society and free speech to argue against liberal society and free speech. But I don't like you using the structures of society which you benefit from day after day after day to argue against those structures of society. Because if you didn't have those structures, Stefan, you'd fall flat on your fucking face the same as the rest of us would, because you cannot live in a society, in a population, in a country of millions and millions of people without having those structures, without the whole thing going to absolute shit.
Throughout most of Western history, people were good in part because they believed in God. They conformed to social norms because they believed in God.
Yeah, do you know, I just don't buy this, Stefan, and I haven't bought this. I used to say things a little bit like this, but I haven't really bought into this for quite a number of years now. Sure, in terms of moral goods that relate particularly to the religion, such as praying or attending church, then the case is absolutely correct there. But other moral goods, such as not stealing and not murdering, don't rely upon codification, such as the Ten Commandments. They're much more fundamental to our empathetic moral sense than what you're talking about there. And they've always carried, this is the thing you talk about as if we're switching over from church to state, they have always carried the sanction of the state, and in many cases carried a much more severe sanction in the past than they do today.
Now, atheism says there is no God, and there is a baby with the bathwater scenario going on there, in that when you throw out God, you throw out the entire moral underpinnings of how to get people to conform to social norms in Western society. You do.
Yeah, I don't really buy this. I think it's kind of the wrong way round. I mean, you're portraying it as if our sense of morality is guided by Scripture. Sure, Scripture's provided a way of codifying that, but it isn't that our morality is guided by Scripture, but rather that the way in, because there's so much in Scripture, you can pick all the bits you want and the bits you don't want. It's that interpretation of Scripture is informed by our moral sense, which exists apart from religion. And that is why you get parts in the Bible about adulterers should be put to death. The bits in the Bible like such as if a child should curse their parents, they should be killed, right? And that is in the same conversation that is God informing Moses in the same conversation where he gives him the Ten Commandments. And yet the Ten Commandments have been retained as this cornerstone of morality, and yet this little bit about killing your children if they should curse you, that's just been pushed to one side as a kind kind of horrible relic of the past. How can you do that if religion, if your morality is founded on the religion and on scripture rather than it being the other way round? You make out as if without this, well, fucking hell, we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater here. I don't agree with that at all. All you need really is the ethic of reciprocity, the golden rule, the kind of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All you have to say, and I'm not talking about ivory tower philosophy here and talking about meta-ethical theory, I'm talking about bringing up little Johnny and Mary to be good people. And you can get 90% of where you need to go just with the ethic of reciprocity. Just saying to little Mary, how would you feel if little Johnny did that to you? Just using that one rule. And if you look that up, right, if you look that up on Wikipedia, for example, you will see a list. There's hardly a religion that there has ever been. There is hardly a culture that has ever existed that has not used that principle in some way, shape or form. It seems to be a universal that encapsulates the way that humans moralize and the way that we use our empathetic sense, which is surely something that is intrinsic in the human condition in terms of fashioning our morality. You don't need scripture, you don't need religion. The ethic of reciprocity, I wish I could say it a bit clearer, but the ethic of reciprocity will get you 90% of where you need to go in terms of doing the job that you're claiming needs to be done.
But the idea that, well, you can just get rid of God in a God-fearing and God-obeying society and it has no effect on social organization or compliance to social norms or anything like that is shockingly naive. And I can't imagine, because since I view atheists as very intelligent, I simply can't imagine that that's something that anyone really believes.
Do you know, you say this, Stefan, and yet somehow, just fucking somehow, the very religious countries like the UK or Sweden or Norway, there, or let's go further afield to Japan or Canada or China or Israel, these kinds of countries that have very high levels of religiosity, somehow I suggest to you have managed to remain at least as ethical as the countries that have much higher levels of religiosity, such as the United States or Mexico or Colombia or Somalia or Pakistan or Iran or Saudi Arabia. I don't see all these really religious countries as being highly moral, and all these less religious countries as being dens of iniquity where nobody knows right from wrong, and everybody's going around stealing, murdering and raping one another. That isn't what the figures bear out, Stefan. So I really don't know what the argument that you're making is here. So that really wraps up the bits of his video that seem to actually have some relevance towards atheism, or rather atheists, it has to be said. Now, he then went on in this second video, how I was right about atheism, to start talking about race and Western societies and Muslims coming over and all this lot. And there was so much there that it would just be a huge video on its own. I'm going to set that to one side. But I know that people will ask me, what do you think about Stefan Molyneux with all this stateless society that he talked about in this video, and he majored on, right? This was his main thing in the first video, was this stateless society. And this idea that if you're voting right wing, you're voting for a smaller state. If you're voting left wing, you're voting for a larger state, as if those are the only reasons for voting. Those are the only differences between them. And that Christians are voting right wing, so they're voting for a smaller state, okay, and that Democrats are voting for this bigger state. And then he starts talking about how tax is theft and how it's unethical to tax people. So the argument that he's kind of making there, as I saw it, right, and I haven't watched all these videos, I know this is a big thing, so sorry if I'm misportraying Stefan Molyneux here. I'm not aiming to do that. I'm giving my thoughts on all of this. The argument that he seems to be making was in some ways that the smaller state lovers are in some ways closer to his position of a stateless society, which to me makes about as much sense as saying, well, yeah, Christians as monotheists are closer to atheism than polytheistic Hindus, because they've narrowed it down to one God, so they've only got to drop one God. It just doesn't work out that way, does it? Their conviction in a God can be just as great. And a right-winger's conviction in society can be just as great, and in having a state, just a smaller state. So it's not necessarily any closer. It's as if I'm sort of saying You know, it's this Stefan Molyneux hates cakes, right? He can't fucking stand cakes. And people who eat cakes he thinks are cunts, right? And the people, Democrats, they like birthday cakes. They like stodgy Christmas cakes. They like great big wedding cakes. They like big cakes. And the Republicans, they like these little beautifully crafted, pardon me, these beautifully crafted cupcakes with all the beautiful icing. Fucking hell, people make businesses out of this shit now. Right, that's what they like. And he's saying, well, that's a smaller cake, so that's closer to no cakes at all. The problem is that they're all cake lovers, right? People who love cupcakes still love cakes. They just like a slightly different form of cakes. In reality, it might be a smaller cake, but it's not really any closer to no cakes than the big cake lovers. It's still just different shades of cake adoration that we have there. And that is the problem with the example that he gives there. And the thing is that Christians are maybe voting Republican and voting this smaller society, but they don't believe that tax is theft and they don't want to pay taxes anymore, do they? I mean, they still... Which is the party in the... I don't know US politics brilliantly, but which is the party that's most in favour of spending so much on having the largest and most expensive armed force in the world? Where does that come from, if not from tax revenue? Do you think people are just going to donate to that out of the goodness of their heart or out of private investment? Bollocks is that going to happen. If that would happen, that is what the government would do, and they'd spend their tax money on something else. That military might only exists because of tax revenue that is, in Stefan's terms, stolen from people on pain of death. Right, that is the only reason that exists, and yet the people on the right are four square behind that. They don't want the shit flowing down the end of their streets. They want their garbage taken away. These things happen because of tax revenue. They want a fire service to turn out when their home's on fire. You know, some of these things in the United Kingdom, we have experienced both sides of these because we had the models where these things weren't funded centrally. And we had a model with fire cover where you had to have fire insurance. You'd have a little plaque on your house saying you had fire insurance, and if you didn't have it, they wouldn't put your house out. And you know what happened? The Great Fire of London. Our capital city was razed to the fucking ground with a fire that got out of control. Why? Because there was no municipal fire service. We just relied on private fire cover that only served those people that had the fire insurance, and so there wasn't the capacity to deal with fires like that, and there wasn't the regulations that would make the city safer, and so we had the Great Fire of London. We learned that fucking lesson. Why would anybody want to go back from a model that doesn't work? Because the problem with that model was, even if you had fire insurance, if your neighbour hadn't and their house catches fire, your house is going to catch fire afterwards, and by then the fire is out of fucking control. Or in the case of the Great Fire of London, you've got a firestorm. Okay, so we've learned that lesson. What about if your brother or sister is killed? Your brother's killed by somebody. Surely you're going to want a police force to, perhaps at great expense, conduct the forensic investigation and the crime scene analysis and throw people at investigating who has killed your brother. And if they find them, the wherewithal to go and capture them, right? And then when they've caught them, you're going to want a judiciary, aren't you, to be able to try them, and that involves a great expense. Even private prosecutions rely on the edifices of the judiciary, which is at great expense to the state, which is all based on tax revenue. And you're going to rely on that for a trial. And then, if they're found guilty of murder, aren't you going to want a prison for them to go in? Is somebody going to run this prison out of the goodness of their heart? Well, it doesn't seem to work that way. We have private prisons in the UK, but the government has to pay the likes of Group 4 to run those fucking prisons because they won't run it as a charity. And it turns out that people won't just pay money and make charitable donations to keep prisons open. just doesn't seem to work that way. So if you want those things, if you want the security of your money being safe in the bank, if you want security that if somebody attacks you, you can call on resources to have them investigated, captured, tried and sent to prison, then you're going to have to pay the taxes on those things. If you want the street at the end of your road to be maintained, look, this is an example, little anecdote just to finish off here. And I give you this example because the alternatives that I know to taxation and to that kind of centralised spending that society spends on behalf of its members, it's not the government's money, we are the government. And it's our money that we are spending on things when the government spends money because we voted for that government. The only alternatives that I know are either private investment, the private sector is willing to pay for it, or charity, or a collective kind of thing that people collectively agree, this will all be in our interests, we'll all chip in and pay for it. I'm going to give you an example of why that doesn't work, and it involves just one road. Thank fuck it only involves one road, because what a fucking mess it would be if it went further than that. So my grandparents lived at a road called Brooklands Avenue in Cleethorpes. You can look it up, it's a real road, it exists. And you can drive around Cleethorpes, it's a seaside town of about 30,000 people. And there are hundreds and hundreds of roads, there's a full road network. And what you will find as you travel around the roads is that they're really well maintained, perfectly asphalted with curbs and pavements and everything, and it looks absolutely brilliant, right? In fact, it almost looks like a load of roads in a first world country, because that's exactly what it is. And then when you arrive at Brooklands Avenue, you will see some very exclusive big houses. It's a lovely, lovely road. Great houses. But the road itself, it's been a little bit better the last few years, but up until a few years ago, looked like it had been lifted. You just lifted a section of road from downtown Kabul and dumped it in the middle of Cleethorpes. And why was that? It's because that is a private road. And that is the only private road in the town. And what that means by a private road is normally you build a road and then you ask the council to adopt it, and the council adopts it, and the council takes ownership of that road, and then with the rates that you've paid, the tax that you've paid, they keep and maintain that road for everybody's good. It's a social good. So effectively central taxing, and then they spend that on the road. And that's what works everywhere else in Cleethorpes apart from Brooklands Avenue. Now, why does the Brooklands Avenue model not work? Well, the reason is, you imagine there's 30 houses down Brooklands Avenue, and the road is falling to pieces. The potholes are so big you can fall down some of the fuckers and you can't get fucking out again. So all the residents get together, they have a meeting. 25 of those households say, yeah, we'll stick £5,000 in each towards mending this road. But the other 5 say, no, we're not sticking anything in. And we can all think of the reasons why that may be. Some of them haven't got the money. Some of them have got the money, but they just couldn't give a fuck about the road. They'd rather spend the money on a lavish summer holiday. Others do give a fuck about the road and they have got the money, but they're a little bit Machiavellian. They think that they cannot pay, and everybody else is so desperate to have the road done, they'll just pay a bit extra. And so effectively, they'll get done what they wanted to be done, which is the road fix, without having to pay for it, bastards that they are. But we all know that people are like that. And then you've got the guy at the start of the road, right? And his position is, well, everybody drives over my bit of road, so everybody should pay for that. But I never go further than my house. All the rest of the road I never use. So why am I paying for that? So he's prepared to pay. What a fucking mess. He'll pay, but he won't pay 5,000. He'll only pay 500. And then the house next to him, he says, well, yeah, I think he's probably got a point. I'm only prepared to pay 800. So the guy down the end, he's going to have to pay 25 grand to make up for all these other fuckers. And the whole thing just becomes a mess. And what happens is just a whole load of bad feeling, and everybody goes, well, fuck you. If you're not going to pay, I'm not going to pay. And that, for a long, long time, has been the story of Brooklands Avenue. Right, now the fortunate thing for the residents of Brooklands Avenue is as soon as you get to the end of Brooklands Avenue, nobody else is working on that model. Everybody else is paying their council tax and having their road repaired, right? And that works really, really well. So as soon as you get to the end of Brooklands Avenue, all the roads are maintained, same as they are everywhere else around the country. It's a damn good job, otherwise you'd need a fucking tractor just to get to the start of Brooklands Avenue. Now, if 20 or 30 households can't organise themselves in a way that works. And the private sector clearly couldn't give a fuck about doing anything about it. And external charities haven't gone, oh, the poor people of Brooklands Avenue will donate money to repair their roads, right? If that isn't going to work on that scale, how would it work on the scale of Cleethorpes? How would it work on the scale of Lincolnshire? How would it work on the scale of England? How would it work on the scale of the United Kingdom or the United States? It wouldn't. Just on the basis of roads alone, unless you fund it by some measure of taxation, it isn't going to fucking work, which is why all first world countries repair their roads through tax rather than relying on the local people who live on the road chipping in to mend the fucking road. Now, if he knows another way, rather than that, or private investment or anything like that, then crack on. But I don't know another way, so I don't know how that's going to work. I hope I've dealt with pretty much everything. He'd made a video purportedly about atheism, but about atheists and this kind of misnomer that most atheists are left-wing. That only really applies to the United States, and I propose that is because the Christian right have sectored off effectively right-wing politics and made it the politics of their religion, which has pushed everybody out the other way and made that right-wing politics all the more extreme on the back of doing so. He then misportrays smaller government as is some way closer to no government. I don't think it is at all. As I say, I don't think the idea of a stateless society works unless there's something I've never really fucking thought about. I've never found a model that works, and I've never seen an example in anything other than the smallest collectives where it actually works. You show me a country of millions of people where that works, and then we can start talking about it. Okay, I hope that puts you in a position enlightens you a little bit with regard to my position on that. And I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.